Is there anything more enticing at the end of a long day than putting your feet up somewhere cozy, sitting back and savoring a fine whiskey? It's got to be said, there aren't many drinks out there that can quite convey that sense of luxury or comfort quite like whiskey does. American comedian and TV host Johnny Carson once said, "Happiness is having a rare steak, a bottle of whiskey, and a dog to eat the rare steak." Now, you won't find much information in this video about steak, or dogs for that matter, but if you want to check the drink part of Johnny's definition of happiness, we've got you covered. Keep watching and we'll fill you in with our pick of classy whiskeys from around the world that everyone should try at least once. Welcome to Alux.com, the place where future billionaires come to get inspired. If you're not subscribed yet, you're missing out. Number 1. Glenfiddich. We just had to begin in Scotland, the spiritual home of whiskey, and we're starting with a distillery that produces the world's highest-selling single malt scotch, familiar the world over with its deer head logo, Glenfiddich. First, an important definition we need to get out of the way. According to the Scotch Whiskey Association, a single malt scotch is a whiskey that's distilled at a single distillery from water and malted barley without any other cereals added into the mix. Distilled in copper pot stills and bottled in Scotland at a minimum of 40% alcohol by volume. Just because Glenfiddich sells bucket loads worldwide doesn't make it any less of a class act. It's known as a go-to of whiskey connoisseurs, as well as one of the best single malts to start with if you're a whiskey newbie. Its fresh, fruity taste means that Glenfiddich is easy on the palate if you're not initiated into the ways of whiskey. A bottle of the entry-level Founder's Reserve will cost an affordable $40, or a Glenfiddich that's been matured longer will go for a higher price, like the 30-year-old, which goes for over $700, or if you have the cash to spare, a rare 50-year-old, which sells for $30,000. Number 2. Macallan. Next up, another single malt scotch from the same region of Scotland as Glenfiddich, Speyside, which is known as having the most accessible Scotch whiskies. Macallan is a little heavier on the taste buds than Glenfiddich, but for the whiskey connoisseur who savors more complex flavors, that's nothing to worry about. Some of the most expensive whiskeys in the world are Macallan, like the Macallan M, a 6-liter bottle that sold at auction for $630,000, and it has a reputation for being one of the most luxurious Scotch brands. But it doesn't have to be crazily expensive. The Macallan 12-year-old sells for a reasonable $70, or splash out on an 18-year-old for $800. Now, if you're wondering why whiskeys need to indicate an age, no, it's not because they have to carry an ID to the bar. The age of a whiskey indicates the number of years it's been matured in the barrels. The longer it's had to mature, the finer the whiskey is, because with time, it picks up new flavors from the wood, and whatever was in the barrel before. For example, most Macallans mature in sherry casks, meaning it picks up a few sherry notes along the way, and needless to say, the older it is, the more expensive. Number 3. Laphroaig. Now for some whiskeys that are a bit more of an acquired taste, and in this case, a bit harder to pronounce from the look of the label. Once more, Laphroaig. And the reason this one takes a bit more getting used to is down to one key part of its flavor profile, the fact it's smoky. Laphroaig comes from the Scottish island of Islay, one of the 6 regions of Scotch whisky production, and it's well known that Islay whiskies are smoky, because when the barley is malted, that means lightly toasted before being fermented. In Islay, they use locally sourced peat, slow-burning soil, to fire things up, and you feel that when you take a sip. Laphroaig is also one of the most easily recognizable Scotch whiskies. In Britain, it has a royal warrant. That means it's an official supplier to the royal family. A 10-year-old will cost you $60, but if you want to go that bit more exclusive, you could choose a 25-year-old for $500. Number 4. Ardbeg. Speaking of smoky whiskeys, this one, also from the Islay region, is legendary among experienced whiskey drinkers because its smoky flavor comes in like a slap in the face, like hot chills, wasabi, or blue cheese. And like all of those, you'll probably either love it or hate it. The 10-year-old is known as a true smoke bomb and measures 96 on the phenol parts per million scale that measures smokiness. Yep, they actually have a scale for measuring that. And the fact it's 46% alcohol helps even further with that kick. And it comes with a price tag of $60, or a 25-year-old will sell for $2,000. Number 5. Johnnie Walker Blue Label. Until now, all the whiskeys we've covered have been single malts. Remember, that means from the same batch at the same distillery. So it's about time on our list for a blend, a mixture of different single malts. True whiskey lovers tend to see blends as a bit of a turnoff, something inferior to single malts and with less character, but they'll usually make an exception for a really great blend, and this is one of those cases. Based in Ayrshire, Scotland, Johnnie Walker is the highest-selling Scotch whiskey brand and specializes in blends. And right at the top of their range, you'll find the Blue Label, a bottle that will cost you around $220. And it's worth it, because with this one, Johnnie Walker have really put out all the stops with their blending expertise. Critics say it has the perfect balance between smoky and smooth. Number 6. Chivas Regal the Icon. If a whiskey enthusiast ever tells you that blends are cheap and trashy, throw this one at them because Chivas Regal's The Icon is known for being the pinnacle of blended whiskeys. It's made of 20 rare old Scotch whiskies, some of them so rare and old that distilleries they're from closed down long ago, which does help to explain its price tag of $3,500. The Icon comes in a bottle specially handcrafted by Scottish glassmakers, and the verdict is, if you've got the cash to spare, this whiskey is so fine it really is worth what you pay for it. Number 7. Bushmills Single Malt. Remember when we called Scotland the spiritual home of whiskey? Well, time for an apology to any Aluxers from Ireland, because Ireland also has a claim, and there's an ongoing dispute between the two countries as to who was the first to distill the drink they both call the water of life. But we'll stay out of that debate and just say that both countries make some amazing whiskies, and Bushmills, based on the northern coast of Ireland, happens to be the oldest whiskey distillery in the world to get a license, back in 1608. And it's not just about history here, it delivers quality too. For something on the exclusive side, don't go for their blends, which are decent, just not exactly luxury whiskeys. Try any Bushmills single malt, which start at $45 for a 10-year-old bottle. Number 8. Teeling. Next, a brand that's known for making some of Ireland's best whiskies, especially from their small batch range, aged in Central American rum casks. And this distillery is also noteworthy for being the youngest on our list. It was set up in 2015 with the aim of reviving the whiskey heritage of Dublin, which was once a proud centre of distilling. Now, on the topic of Irish whiskey, a couple of key facts. Scotch and Irish whiskey do have a lot in common, like the fact they're both made from barley. But while Scotch is usually distilled twice, Irish whiskey is distilled 3 times. The Irish version of the drink is also known for being smoother and easier to drink than Scotch, although not as complex on the palate to the experienced whiskey drinker. And the final difference is the spelling. While the Irish spell it with an E, Whiskey, the Scottish spell it without the E, just a Y at the end. And it's worth mentioning that when Americans make whiskey, they use the Irish spelling with the E, that is. Speaking of which, time to switch continents and get talking about those American whiskeys. Number 9. Jefferson's Ocean Aged at Sea. Our first pick of American whiskeys has to be a bourbon, that classic American spirit that uses corn as its main ingredient and is almost exclusively made in Kentucky. Jeffersons are based in Louisville, Kentucky, and made a classic range of bourbons, any of which we'd be happy to recommend, but we chose its Ocean Aged at Sea partly out of novelty value, because just like the label tells you, this drink is matured in barrels on a ship. Yep, it really is aged at sea, and some say this gives it a unique salty taste. Not everybody's convinced that aging at sea really does anything to the taste, but whether you believe it or not, you can still appreciate it as a quality bourbon, and it sells for $90 a bottle. Number 10. William Larue Weller. Next up, a legendary bourbon with a serious price tag to match. It gets its name from one of Kentucky's first whiskey makers, and it comes from the USA's oldest distillery, Buffalo Trace in Frankfort, Kentucky. Perhaps even more impressive, the distillery managed to stay open during the Prohibition in the 1920s, as they persuaded customs officials their spirits were purely for medicinal purposes. Now that's got to deserve a toast to William Larue's health. This one's at the top of the W.L. Weller range of wheated bourbons. That means they're made with wheat, as well as a minimum 51% of corn that goes into the mix, and it distinguishes itself by being the only one in the range to have the founder's full name, William Larue Weller, instead of the less exclusive ones which just call themselves WL. And of course, it's pricier at $700 a bottle. Number 11. Pappy Van Winkle's Family Reserve. If bourbon's your drink of choice, this is one you just have to try, even if it's only once. It's known as the bourbon that everyone wants but no one can get. Fans of Pappy spend a lot of time trying to hunt down a bottle, and bars that stock it charge $100 a shot. It gets its name from Julian Van Winkle, who started out as a liquor salesman for W.L. Weller Company before buying his own distillery. It's also distilled in Frankfort, Kentucky, and uses a secret family recipe. If you can find one, you'll have to pay around $900 just for the privilege of enjoying a bottle of Pappy. Number 12. WhistlePig's Samurai Scientist. Time to move on from bourbon to another classic North American spirit, rye. Whiskies from Scotland and Ireland use barley for their base, and bourbon uses corn, while rye uses, you guessed it, rye. You know, the grain that goes into the bread you'll find in health food stores. It's a favorite in Canada as well as the USA, and cocktail fans know it as the main ingredient in a Manhattan. WhistlePig may not be the most glamorous of names, but they come out with some fine rye whiskies, and this is one of their best. Matured in barrels imported from Japan that were originally used to store the Japanese plum drink umeshu. Number 13. The Yamazaki. From rye matured in Japanese barrels, let's move on to whiskey that's actually distilled in Japan. If you're surprised to see Japan on this list, well, time to get with the script. The Japanese now make some of the best whiskeys in the world. They base them on recipes for Scotch, but they sure know how to make these whiskeys their own. The Yamazaki is Japan's oldest whiskey distillery, dating back to 1923. That's when they discovered that features of Japan's geography made it ideally suited to whiskey production, like the pure crystalline water and the extreme changes to temperature that come in handy for the maturation process. Yamazaki's biggest seller is the 12-year-old, which is a fan favorite of whiskey lovers and sells for $170 a bottle, and their longer matured whiskeys go for serious cash, like their 25-year-old, which costs $9,000. Number 14. Hakushu. Another Japanese whiskey with a great reputation and probably Japan's best-known smoky whiskey. The 12-year-old costs $200 and the 25-year-old, known for being its finest, goes for $6,000. The price comes partly from the fact that Japanese distillers often import the ingredients from Scotland, including the barley, and in the case of the Hakushu, even the peat, to give it that smoky flavor. As well as that, the high quality and lower production quantities all add up to mean that, yeah, Japanese whiskeys are hella expensive. Number 15. Hibiki. Our last pick is owned by the Suntory brand, which also owns Hakushu. The difference is that while Hakushu is a single malt, Hibiki does blends, and for so many whiskey lovers, Japan makes some fine blends. An upmarket choice is the Hibiki 17-year-old, which sells for around $500 a bottle. For something more affordable but still high quality, you could go for the Hibiki Harmony at $100. So, Aluxers, when you think of whiskey, what's the first whiskey brand you think of? Let us know in the comments. Now, since you stuck with us until the end, we do have one more bonus for you to savor. Isabella's Isla. Aluxers, you were probably wondering what's the most expensive bottle of whiskey, weren't you? Well, we don't like to disappoint, so here it is. The prize for the most expensive whiskey in the world goes to Isabella's Isla. As you guessed from the name, it's distilled on the Scottish island of Islay, and if you've been paying attention, you'll know it means it's a smoky one. A single bottle sells for a mind-boggling $6.2 million. It comes in an elegant decanter, embedded with diamonds and rubies, which, to be totally honest, you'd expect for that price. And the big question is it worth it? Truth be told, we can't speak from experience. Even for us lovers of all things luxury, that's a bit beyond our budget. But the few who have tasted it say drinking it is a sublime experience, the pinnacle of all things whiskey. Hey Luxers, we hope you've enjoyed this video. Let's finish off by saying Sláinte. That means cheers in Scottish, Gaelic, and Irish. But remember, if you visit Scotland or Ireland, you can just say it in English instead. Now, Aluxers, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more quality content every day.